21 years ago, a 19-year-old college student vanished on her way home in Burlington, Vermont, leaving her family trapped in an unresolved nightmare. Authorities once suspected her ex-boyfriend was involved, but with no evidence, no body, and the investigation at a dead end, they hit a wall. Desperate, her parents never gave up, holding annual memorials and pleading with police to reopen the case. Then one day, a tiny detail from a silver Corolla, forgotten for nearly 2 decades, unexpectedly cracked open the door to the truth, completely reshaping the perspective on the case. Before diving into this chilling story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you find it gripping, don't forget to hit subscribe to stay updated. On the afternoon of October 14, 2004, Burlington took on a strange hue of autumn teetering on the edge of winter, with a biting chill carried by gusts of wind swirling through the streets. On Church Street, where maple trees were turning a fiery red, the sunset stretched into a vibrant streak of pink and gold, casting a warm glow on shop signs and small storefront windows. In that bustling corner, Elena Green, a 19-year-old with a gentle face and bright eyes, was finishing her shift at a modest cafe. Elena wasn't one to stand out in a crowd, but friends and coworkers knew her as a diligent student, always ready to help others, always smiling, even when work was hectic. Her dream was to study nursing, to one day wear a white coat and care for those in need of healing. At 19, Elena was still full of hope that her life was unfolding ahead, bright and promising. Around 6 in the evening, after drying the last of the glasses, Elena slipped on a thick jacket, fixed her hair, and stepped out onto the porch. The cold wind flushed her cheeks pink. She pulled out her phone to call her mom, her voice cheerful as she said she was heading home in her familiar silver Toyota Corolla. In a small kitchen a few miles away, her mother smiled, listening to her daughter's voice while preparing dinner. The smell of steaming soup, the sizzling of meat in a pan, the steady rhythm of a knife chopping vegetables, all blended into the familiar comfort of family life. She pictured her daughter walking through the door, dropping her bag, smiling as always, and the family gathering around the dinner table. But what she waited for never came. The minutes ticked by on the wall clock, daylight quickly faded, and darkness blanketed the quiet neighborhood streets. 6:30, then 7, and the house was left with only the faint clink of kitchen utensils and the whistle of wind through the door's cracks. With each passing minute, anxiety grew like a heavy stone in the mother's chest. The chair set at the dinner table remained empty. The soup went cold, and the once warm kitchen turned into a silent, suffocating space. The wall clock struck 8, its chimes cutting through the emptiness of a home usually filled with laughter. The mother stood frozen by the window, her eyes locked on the small road leading to the house, certain that any moment, the familiar headlights of the silver Corolla would appear in the distance. But the road stayed dark, eerily still. The father sat in the living room, his fingers tapping restlessly on the armrest, his heart pounding in his chest. The dinner on the table had gone cold, the faint smell of soup, a reminder that the Greens' normal life had been torn apart. By 9, waiting had turned to panic. The father sprang up, pacing the room like a caged animal, then grabbed the landline. He dialed Elena's best friend first, his voice trembling as he asked, "Is she with you? Has anyone seen her after her shift?" The response was only surprise and confusion. No, they hadn't seen Elena, no news at all. He called others, classmates, co-workers at the community college. The answers were the same, repeated like a verdict. No one knew where Elena was. The mother couldn't accept it. Her hand shook as she redialed the cafe's number, hoping her daughter had just stayed late, or been caught up in something unexpected. But the manager's voice came through, firm. Elena left the cafe at 6 sharp, even waving goodbye to everyone before stepping out. Those words struck like a knife to the mother's heart, her body going cold. She hung up, tears streaming down her cheeks. The father stood still for a moment, then grabbed his jacket and car keys. He said curtly, "I'm going to find her." The pickup truck roared to life, speeding onto the empty street. Its headlights swept across silent houses, casting shadows of maple trees shedding leaves onto the road. He drove through every familiar route, checking the narrow shortcuts Elena sometimes took to get home faster. At every turn, he hoped to see the glow of the silver Corolla's lights, but the roads were empty, filled only with darkness and cold wind. He stopped by the road along Lake Champlain, where Elena used to walk after her shifts. The lake stretched out quietly, moonlight reflecting like a mirror, but there was no sign of his daughter. Meanwhile, at home, the mother sat by the phone, the directory spread out on the table. She called friends, distant relatives, even next-door neighbors. All gave the same answer. No, no one had seen Eleni. Each time she hung up, it felt like another piece of her heart was torn away. She glanced at the clock. The minute hand was nearing 10. The ticking became a mournful knell, reminding her that time was working against them. The father returned from a fruitless search. His face was pale, his jacket damp with night dew. He shook his head, his eyes hollow with worry. The couple looked at each other, their fear unspoken but palpable. They knew Eleni had never stayed out overnight without notice, never vanished from their sight for so long. Finally, at 9:45, they had no choice but to call the Burlington police. The father picked up the phone, his voice hoarse as he explained. "My daughter, Elena Green, 19 years old, is missing. She called her mom at 6, said she was coming home, but she still hasn't shown up." On the other end, the duty officer listened, but responded in a flat, indifferent tone. "Maybe she's out with friends. Young girls sometimes stay out overnight." That cold reply made the mother burst into tears. She grabbed the receiver, her voice choked with desperation and fury. "She's not like that. She's never done this. Please believe us. Something terrible has happened." The father tried to stay calm, emphasizing that Eleni hadn't taken any luggage, extra clothes, or left any note beyond the 6 o'clock call home. This wasn't impulsive behavior, but the officers still logged it as a runaway case and promised patrol cars would keep an eye out in the area, offering no commitment to an immediate search that night. After hanging up, the house fell silent. Only the dim yellow light illuminated the cold dinner table, accompanied by the mother's stifled sobs. The father sat down, his hands clenched until they turned white, overwhelmed by helplessness. In that moment, they realized the nightmare had truly begun, and they were facing a long battle to find their daughter. As the clock ticked past 10, the duty officer finally agreed to formally log Elena Green's disappearance. In the brightly lit fluorescent room at Burlington Police Headquarters, the first papers bearing her name were placed on the desk: age, height, weight, identifying features, last seen clothing. The process was mechanical, but for Elena's parents, each word felt like a cut, confirming their worst fears were becoming reality. A portrait photo provided by the family, Elena's bright smile, was quickly copied for distribution to patrol units. The police began initial steps, canvassing roads around the cafe where Elena worked, questioning nearby shops, and collecting any statements available that night. Elena's best friend, a classmate named Sarah, was called to the station to provide information. Shaking, Sarah recounted that just days earlier, Elena had mentioned a strange man who often stood outside the cafe window, staring inside. Elena said it made her uncomfortable, but hadn't yet reported it to the manager. Her statement silenced the interrogation room. The father gripped his hands tightly, palms slick with sweat. The mother broke down, insisting that Elena wasn't one to imagine or exaggerate, so if she mentioned a stranger, it was no coincidence. Meanwhile, patrol cars scoured the roads from Church Street to the Greens' home. But the silver Toyota Corolla remained completely missing. The only witness, an old man living near the turnoff to Lake Champlain, said around 6:15, he briefly saw a silver car heading toward the lake, driven by a woman with long hair. He wasn't sure if it was Elena, but the timing matched, so the information was taken seriously. Police immediately sent a search team to comb the lake area that night, but beyond darkness and the cold water reflecting moonlight, no traces were found. The Green family was asked to stay in the waiting room, where the clock ticked heavily and cold coffee cups on the table made the atmosphere even bleaker. The father kept standing up, repeatedly asking for updates, but the response was always the same: "We're doing everything we can." The mother sat curled up, her red-rimmed eyes fixed on Elena's photo on the table, her lips murmuring prayers. The investigation was complicated by the technology of 2004. The Church Street area had only a few outdated store security cameras, their blurry footage unable to identify license plates or faces. The video clips police collected showed only vague figures passing by, possibly including Elena, but nothing clear enough to confirm. Without GPS or smartphones to track locations, every lead seemed swallowed by time. Each passing minute eroded hope further. The father sighed heavily, looking at his wife, seeing her tremble in her thin sweater, her eyes vacant like someone nearing collapse. He knew they couldn't keep relying on the slow pace of procedure, but they had no other choice. In that moment, their greatest fear surged. This was no longer a harmless delay or an impulsive overnight trip. This could be a real abduction, and their daughter might be in the hands of a stranger. That thought cut like a cold blade through their hearts, marking the start of a sleepless night that none in the Green family could have imagined would be just the beginning of nearly 2 decades of anguish. The next morning, Burlington awoke under a heavy atmosphere. News of Elena Green's disappearance spread quickly through the community, and police officially called for volunteers to aid in the search. By 7 a.m., over 200 people gathered at a parking lot near the police station, equipped with thick jackets, gloves, flashlights, and even small snowmobiles for navigating wet terrain. From neighbors who watched Elena grow up, to classmates, to complete strangers who heard the news on the radio, all shared one goal: finding the young woman who vanished after an afternoon shift. Search teams were divided into groups. One used canine units to scour paths leading to the outskirts, especially the route along Lake Champlain, where the witness claimed to have seen a silver car. The dogs sniffed through grass and trees, but found only unidentifiable shoe prints. Meanwhile, rescue teams deployed motorboats to scan the lake, while helicopters circled above Colchester, their lights sweeping over wet forests and small streams. The scene resembled a military operation, but they weren't hunting an enemy. They were searching for a 19-year-old girl who had vanished into thin air. In the city, flyers with Elena's image were distributed rapidly. Posters bearing her radiant smile were plastered on lampposts, shop windows, and church bulletin boards. The bold words, "Missing, Elena Green," haunted passers-by, forcing them to pause and look. In Montpelier, nearly an hour's drive from Burlington, Elena's image appeared too, spreading beyond the small town and becoming a regional concern. That afternoon, Burlington's main church was packed for an emergency prayer vigil. Hundreds sat on wooden pews, heads bowed, candlelight flickering on worried faces. The priest offered prayers for Elena's safety, his warm voice heavy with the community's pain. When Elena's parents took the podium, the church fell silent. The mother could barely stand, supported by her husband, her voice trembling. "Please help us. Our daughter is out there alone, and we know she didn't run away. If anyone knows anything, please speak up." Her plea brought tears to many, and hands clasped tightly in silence. That evening, local TV aired an interview with the Green family. Before the camera, the father's eyes were bloodshot from sleeplessness, his words slow. "Elena is a kind girl. She's never disappeared without notice. We beg anyone with information, no matter how small, to call the police. Every second counts." The mother sat beside him, clutching her daughter's photo, tears streaming down. The brief speech left a powerful impact, prompting thousands of viewers to call the station, expressing concern and offering to help. Yet, as night fell again, the anxiety didn't ease. Search teams' flashlights still flickered in the woods, canine barks echoed faintly, but Elena remained missing. The hope kindled at dawn turned to heavy fear. In the Green's small home, prayer candles still burned, but the mother's silence hinted she was beginning to sense something far darker. In the days following the massive search, a chilling silence enveloped Burlington. Residents followed news on papers and local stations, hoping for a spark of hope, but what came only deepened the exhaustion. On the third morning, police received a tip from Montpelier. A woman claimed she saw a young girl with hair and a build like Elena's leaving a convenience store with a middle-aged man in a brown coat. The news made the Greens' hearts race. Elena's mother, exhausted from sleepless nights, gripped the phone, pressing, "Are you sure? Was it my daughter?" Police immediately sent a team to Montpelier, canvassing the store area and pulling crude 2004 security footage. But the blurry images revealed it was another girl, taller, with a different face. The man was just a local customer. The fleeting hope crumbled, leaving a heavier void than before. Just a day later, an emergency 911 call sparked another wave of hope. A man reported passing a gas station in suburban Beret and seeing a silver Toyota Corolla parked in a dark corner, its license plate seemingly matching the police alert. The tip was relayed to the investigation team. Within 10 minutes, patrol cars surrounded the station. Elena's father, notified by police, sped to the scene, his heart pounding with belief that his daughter might be near. But when flashlights illuminated the car, the cold truth emerged. It was a different silver Corolla, a different model, with only a few matching plate digits. No Elena, no traces. Once again, the family's hope was crushed in seconds. This cycle of false leads kept emerging and collapsing, piling on disappointment. Day after day, the Greens lived in a half-dream, half-waking state. The mother sat motionless by the window, staring at the road Elena used to take to school, waiting for a familiar figure. The father, each evening after police wrapped up, drove through Burlington himself, tracing every turn, every road to Lake Champlain, hoping to spot the Corolla's headlights. But every night, he returned empty-handed, his face more gaunt. The police, initially cautious with the runaway theory, were forced to shift perspective. Elena's never staying out without notice, combined with dead-end leads, made them lean toward a grimmer possibility. She was intercepted on her way home. The lead investigator noted in a report, "We can't rule out a traffic accident, but the scenario of interference by a stranger or suspicious acquaintance is becoming increasingly likely." Hearing this, the Greens' hearts sank. In their small home, photos of Elena, her radiant smile at high school graduation, her vibrant presence at her 18th birthday, became daggers in their hearts. Each call brought hope, then shattered it, leaving exhausting despair. The mother sometimes broke into uncontrollable sobs, while the father stayed silent, his eyes aging decades in days. In Burlington, community concern didn't wane. Residents continued sharing Elena's image on bulletin boards, diner windows, and during prayer vigils. But the mood had shifted. The belief that Elena just went somewhere and would return faded, replaced by tense worry that a dangerous person might be lurking in this peaceful community. As darkness fell again, the only question echoing in everyone's minds was, where did Elena go and who took her? On the third day after her disappearance, a faint hope flared from an unexpected call. A fisherman in Colchester, rowing through the marshy edge of Lake Champlain, noticed something glinting under the water in the cold morning light. He initially thought it was discarded rusted metal, but closer inspection revealed a car's shape beneath black mud and thick reeds. The report reached Burlington police immediately. Within an hour, the scene was sealed off, a crane and dive team dispatched. Dozens of curious locals gathered on the shore, holding their breath as the recovery unfolded. When the crane lifted the heavy object, mud and moss fell away, revealing the name Toyota and a scratched silver finish. There was no doubt it was Elena Green's Corolla. The car was set on the wet ground, and police cordoned off the area, setting up tarps for examination. A suffocating tension hung over the scene. Elena's parents arrived, their hearts nearly stopping at the sight of their daughter's familiar car. The father, face haggard, needed an officer's support as his legs buckled. The mother, eyes bloodshot, repeated, "Where's my daughter? Where's Elena?" Inside the car, the scene raised more questions than answers. The driver's seat was reclined, as if deliberately adjusted, not in Elena's usual position. On the front passenger floor mat, Technicians found a small blood stain soaked into the fabric. Test results weren't immediate, but the mark alone sent chills through everyone. Even more suspicious, Elena's wallet and phone were gone, as if someone had deliberately erased all traces. No Elena in the car, no sign she'd escaped safely. News of the Corolla's discovery spread rapidly. Local papers ran bold headlines. Elena Green's car recovered in Colchester. TV stations aired footage of the crane lifting the mudcake car, an image that cut through the community like a knife. Burlington and Colchester residents were stunned, fear spreading faster than ever. This was no longer an ordinary missing person case. At a press conference that afternoon, Burlington's police chief stated firmly, "Based on findings at the scene, we are officially treating Elena Green's case as foul play." His words sparked a wave of anxiety in the community. What the Greens had sensed from the start was now a painful reality. Elena didn't leave willingly. Someone intervened, and she was likely in grave danger. For police, the Corolla's discovery was both a breakthrough and a barrier. They had their first major lead, but the key piece, Elena, was missing. At the scene, forensics meticulously collected every fiber, every trace. An unusual mud smear on the car door was sampled. A few hairs on the back seat were bagged as evidence. But the biggest question lingered: who drove the car to this remote marsh, and how was it abandoned without notice? The Green family sank into despair. The father stopped his nightly drives, instead sitting motionless in the living room, staring blankly at Elena's photo on a small shrine. After the press conference, the mother clutched the police spokesperson's hand, whispering through tears, "Please find her alive or whatever, just bring her back." Her words moved many reporters to turn away, hiding their emotions. That night, Burlington lit up again. But the atmosphere was different. On Church Street, where Elena worked her afternoon shift, people gathered in small groups, whispering. Some claimed to have seen a dark van near the cafe days earlier. Others mentioned a strange face appearing repeatedly in the neighborhood. All these stories, true or false, were noted by police, but weren't enough to form a clear picture. Meanwhile, the silver Corolla was taken to a police garage, sealed tightly. Its image under neon lights, silent like a mute witness, became the investigation's centerpiece. From that moment, Elena Green's case entered a new phase, one where everyone understood only two outcomes were possible. Either the truth would be revealed with all its pain, or the darkness would swallow Elena forever. When Elena's silver Corolla was pulled from the Colchester marsh and the case was officially deemed foul play, Burlington police shifted their focus. They began zeroing in on those closest to Elena, as experience showed that in many missing person cases, the perpetrator is often someone known. The first name on the list was Mark Jensen, Elena's ex-boyfriend. The two had dated for nearly a year before a contentious breakup. Just a month before Elena vanished, neighbors witnessed a heated argument between them outside Mark's apartment. In the eyes of investigators, Mark became suspect number one. Mark was summoned to the Burlington police station on a dreary evening, the cold interrogation room echoing with the hum of a ventilation fan. In front of the detectives, Mark appeared tense but tried to stay calm. He admitted that his relationship with Elena ended badly, with arguments over jealousy and Elena's focus on her nursing studies. "But I never wanted to hurt her," Mark insisted, looking directly at the investigating officer. When asked about the evening of October 14th, Mark claimed he wasn't in Burlington but in New Hampshire, camping with college friends. He provided evidence, a gas station receipt, a dinner bill, and confirmation from 3 close friends who were with him. The police couldn't ignore his alibi. They immediately verified every detail. Sure enough, a gas station camera on I-89 captured Mark and his friends around 7 p.m. the night Elena disappeared. The receipts matched the timeline, and his friends' statements were consistent. On paper, Mark had a solid alibi. Yet, the suspicion surrounding Mark Jensen didn't ease. In the Burlington community, rumors spread faster than any official news. At the cafe where Elena worked, whispers circulated that Mark had been overly controlling, often showing up unannounced to check on her during evening shifts. Some classmates murmured that Mark never accepted the breakup. His eyes filled with anger whenever Elena's name came up. These half-true, half-speculated stories led many to believe his alibi might be a clever cover. Local media fueled the suspicion. The Chittenden County newspaper ran a bold headline, "Elena's ex-boyfriend under investigation." Though the article didn't confirm guilt, the title's framing made it hard for readers not to assume Mark was the culprit. Whenever he left his house, neighbors' prying eyes followed. A friend of Mark's later said he couldn't go grocery shopping without hearing whispers behind him. Sometimes he'd abandon his cart and just run out. Amid the growing suspicion, the police held a press conference. In a room packed with reporters, the spokesperson spoke slowly. "We currently lack sufficient evidence to charge anyone. All leads are being investigated. We ask the community to let us work based on facts, not rumors." The statement aimed to calm tensions, but for the Green family, the unease didn't lessen. Elena's mother told a reporter, "I don't know if Mark is involved, but I know my daughter didn't vanish willingly. Someone took her from us." Internally, despite Mark's seemingly airtight alibi, some investigators kept him on the watch list. Too many past cases had culprits fabricating alibis to escape justice. Detective Keller, handling witness interviews, noted in the file, "Mark Jensen requires further monitoring. Alibi plausible, but emotional motive cannot be dismissed." The following days, Burlington remained steeped in suspicion. For many, Mark Jensen was the name they wanted to see indicted. But for the police, the truth was more complex. And while all eyes focused on the ex-boyfriend, other leads, small but significant, were quietly emerging from the cold ground around Lake Champlain. 2 weeks after the silver Corolla was pulled from the Colchester marsh and Mark Jensen was cleared as a suspect, the atmosphere in Burlington had shifted. Initially, every update about Elena dominated headlines, but now, front pages gave way to routine stories: a fall festival in Montpelier, a highway accident. Reporters who once camped outside the Greens' home dwindled to a few, and the satellite news van parked on the corner had left. The urgency and tension of the early days gave way to a heavy silence, as if the town was trying to swallow a pain it didn't know how to process. In the Greens' small home, time seemed frozen. The father, who once tirelessly searched every street for his daughter, now sat motionless for hours at the kitchen table, staring at Elena's photo in a wooden frame. The mother had visibly wasted away. She rarely left the chair by the window, her vacant eyes fixed on the familiar road. She no longer cried as much as in the early days, replaced by a chilling silence, as if her body had run dry of tears. Neighbors said the living room light stayed on all night, with the mother's silhouette sitting still, like a forgotten statue. The Burlington police, after exhaustive efforts, had to admit the investigation was at a dead end. Searches around Lake Champlain yielded nothing beyond a few tire tracks mixed with countless others. Witness statements about a dark van or strange man were checked and led nowhere. No clear security footage, no strong DNA evidence, no confessions. In a report to the Vermont State Office, the case was relabeled "Missing Person, Suspected Homicide." The cold stamp carried heavy meaning. Police no longer believed Elena was alive. For the community, it was a blow to already fragile hope. Prayer vigils at the church thinned, attended only by family and Elena's close friends lighting candles. The posters on Church Street began to tear under winter winds, the paper yellowing, ink blurring in the snow. Passers-by glanced and hurried on, avoiding the Greens' gaze as if their pain was too much to face. In the cold kitchen, the Greens' dinners were now just 2 portions, eaten in silence. The father repeated the same line, "There has to be something we missed. There has to be." But seeing his wife's empty eyes, he knew the words held no comfort. The mother once whispered in a final local TV interview, "If she were alive, she'd find a way to reach us. I know Elena. I gave birth to her. If she's silent, it means someone took her." Her voice broke on the last word, and the camera cut away to spare the image of a woman collapsing. Time began to freeze the case. The community, once ablaze with unity, retreated to their own concerns. The Greens were trapped in an endless cycle of hope and despair, each day like the last, with one difference: Elena still didn't come home. By late 2004, after over 2 months of fruitless searching, Elena Green's case was officially transferred from Burlington Police to the Vermont State Police's Special Investigations Unit. The decision was announced in a brief press conference, where the spokesperson tried to maintain a neutral tone, but everyone knew a case handed to the state meant local police had exhausted all leads and resources. The Greens sat silently in the front row, the mother clutching Elena's photo, the father bowing his head, hands clasped as if suppressing rage and despair. The state police's initial reports revealed harsh truths. No DNA could be matched. The small bloodstain on the Corolla's floor mat wasn't enough for comprehensive analysis. 2004 testing technology couldn't build a genetic profile. The CODIS database yielded no matches. Most security cameras in Burlington and Colchester were outdated, offering only blurry images of passing cars, useless as evidence. Most critically, no direct witnesses saw Elena being stopped or taken. All they had were fleeting accounts: a dark van, a strange face, a figure by the lake. Nothing solid enough to build a case. The case, once followed hourly by the community, quietly faded. In the press, Elena Green's name appeared only occasionally in small corners. Family still seeks answers in missing girl. Burlington residents, after weeks of tension, returned to daily life. On Church Street, the missing person posters tore apart, shredded by winter winds, leaving faded scraps dangling like unhealed wounds. Yet the case didn't entirely vanish. Occasionally, Vermont State Police received odd calls. A woman claiming she saw someone like Elena on a bus from Boston to Montreal. A trucker saying he gave a ride to a nervous young passenger claiming to be Elena. Or a rumor that she'd run off with a new boyfriend to live in New York. But every lead investigated dissolved into nothing. No confirmations, no evidence, just more exhaustion and another layer of dust on an already thick file. For the Greens, the pain became a smoldering scar. The mother began avoiding reporters, no longer wanting to speak publicly because talking changes nothing. The father persistently contacted police, sending emails, visiting the Vermont State Police to meet investigators. Each time, he got the same brief reply: "We're still working, but no new information." To him, it felt like an indefinite sentence. As 2005 began, Elena Green's case was officially noted internally as a cold case. The term was as cold as the Vermont winter snow blanketing everything, burying what little hope remained. But for those who loved Elena, this chill wasn't an end. It was a long pause, where pain was suppressed, waiting for a day when new light might shine. 10 years after that autumn afternoon in 2004, when Elena Green vanished from Burlington, for the Green family, time never flowed smoothly. Each day, each month passed, like layers of snow weighing on memories, leaving an unfillable void. Every October, when maple leaves blazed red on Church Street, the family held a small memorial. They set a long table in the local church hall, displaying Elena's smiling photo in her high school graduation gown, a few candles flickering in the autumn breeze, and a vase of white lilies. The mother always prepared herself. Old friends, neighbors, and sometimes strangers quietly attended, leaving messages in a guest book. We never forgot Elena. Elena's mother, after a decade of carrying grief, refused to accept silence. In early 2014, she wrote a long letter to the Vermont State Police and the press, demanding the case be reopened. In it, she described her daughter, a 19-year-old full of ambition, passionate about nursing, who played the piano and never intended to run away. She wrote, "10 years have passed, but I believe someone out there knows what happened. Please give us another chance to find the truth." The letter quickly spread online, republished in local papers, becoming one of the rare sparks that brought Elena Green's name back to the front page. That same year, a Facebook group called Justice for Elena Green was created by one of Elena's old classmates, now a teacher in Montpelier. Starting with a few dozen members, it grew to thousands within months. Members shared memories, photos, or small pieces related to Elena. Some reposted old missing flyers, photographed from 2004. Others recalled their last encounter with Elena at the cafe, remembering her in a navy wool coat, smiling as she said goodbye. The group became a hub, not just for seeking justice, but for keeping Elena's memory alive. The most shared post was by a middle-aged woman who recounted driving past the Lake Champlain Road on the evening of October 14, 2004, and noticing the headlights of a silver car parked quietly by the roadside. At the time, she thought little of it, just a fleeting image in her rearview mirror. But when Elena vanished and the Corolla was found, that memory haunted her. Now, 10 years later, she wrote, "I blame myself for not stopping. Maybe Elena was there, needing help." Her confession was shared hundreds of times, with comments lamenting that even small details could be vital puzzle pieces. In Burlington, the memory of the night Elena vanished remained a scar. Locals recalled hearing helicopters buzzing over Colchester, seeing police cordons around the lake, and feeling anxiety grip every small street. A former witness, now in his 30s, posted in the Facebook group that he still remembered his mother pulling him inside when news spread of a strange man lurking near the cafe where Elena worked. "We were scared, but time swept it away. Looking back, I wish I'd told police more details then," he wrote. 10 years later, these stories didn't solve the mystery, but offered something else. A reminder that Elena Green wasn't just a name in a cold case file. She was part of the community, a girl with dreams and a smile who once existed here. For the Greens, seeing thousands online, many strangers, sharing, praying, and repeating their daughter's name, was a fragile comfort amid a decade of waiting. But, with hope, came growing pain. Each mention of Elena revived the unanswered question, what really happened that autumn night in 2004, and why, after all these years, did the darkness still swallow the answer? In 2018, a new spark of hope emerged after nearly 14 years in the dark. Thanks to a federal grant, Vermont State Police launched a program applying genealogical DNA to long-standing cold cases. Elena Green's name resurfaced, marked with a red star as a prime candidate for scientific advances. The news quickly reached the Greens. The father, accustomed to cycles of hope and disappointment, said in a trembling, choked voice, "If there's new technology, if there's a chance, we're ready to wait." A forensic team was tasked with revisiting old evidence, with the key piece being the microscopic bloodstain found on the Corolla's floor mat. In 2004, it was too small to do more than confirm it was human blood. By 2018, next-generation sequencing allowed them to do the seemingly impossible: extract and piece together enough DNA fragments to analyze. The process was slow, like assembling a puzzle holding Elena's fate. When the results appeared on the screen, anticipation gripped the lab. The DNA profile was entered into CODIS, the national database. The computer hummed, lights blinked, but the screen delivered a familiar, heartbreaking message: no match found, no direct hits, no suspects in the system. In theory, Elena's case remained at a dead end, but this wasn't 2004. The technicians exchanged glances, and the lead said softly, "We can try genealogical DNA." Unlike CODIS, which only matches known criminal DNA, genealogical DNA taps into commercial and public databases, where millions of Americans submit samples for family history. Instead of seeking a perfect match, they'd look for distant relatives, cousins, great-grandchildren, even those sharing just a few percent of DNA. From these fragments, analysts would build a family tree, tracing branches backward to narrow down a name tied to the time, place, and circumstances of the case. The process wasn't simple. Massive genealogical charts were spread out. Software ran for hours to link data. On a whiteboard in the investigation office, unfamiliar names were scrawled, connected by arrows like a web spanning the U.S. Young investigators, raised with technology, patiently traced each family branch from Ohio to Pennsylvania, then circling to upstate New York. For the Greens, the wait stretched on again. The mother, despite frail health, diligently checked on progress weekly. She wrote in her diary, I don't know if this technology will bring Elena back, but I feel finally someone's truly hearing her call. The father, more cautious, told reporters, "We're used to disappointment, but this time, it feels different." And something was different. For the first time in years, instead of ending with no lead, Elena Green's file was marked active, genetic genealogy in progress. A small step, but for the Greens and Burlington, it was a faint light in a decade-and-a-half-long tunnel. The genealogical DNA analysis stretched over months, but by late 2018, thin threads began weaving a clearer picture. From the microscopic blood on the Corolla's floor mat, scientists built a massive family tree spanning hundreds of names across the U.S. They narrowed it down, ruling out branches that migrated south decades ago. Focusing on New England, on the Vermont State Police whiteboard, names lined up, linked by red arrows. Each week, investigators crossed off a few, until one branch stood out, a family living right in Burlington. This branch silenced the investigators. Among the distant relatives matching the DNA, Daniel Whitmore's name emerged clearly. Records showed Whitmore, born in 1972, had lived 2 blocks from the cafe where Elena worked. Occupation, freelance plumber. Criminal history: 1 arrest for a bar fight, 1 serious traffic violation. Not a hardened criminal, but enough to raise suspicion. When cross-referenced with time and place, the picture became chillingly clear. In 2004, when Elena vanished, Whitmore was renting an apartment on Maple Street, right on the route Elena walked from the cafe to her car. Detective Keller noted in the file, "Proximity is everything." The more they considered it, the less the coincidences seemed random. Whitmore didn't just live near the cafe, he also knew a few people who worked the same shift as Elena. An old witness had once mentioned that in the weeks before Elena's disappearance, a man was often seen standing outside the cafe's window, staring inside. Back then, the description was too vague to identify anyone. Now, when Whitmore's old photo was placed next to the witness's memory, they nodded in confirmation. That's the build. Police began reviewing Whitmore's movements in 2004. They discovered he abruptly left his Maple Street apartment just 2 months after the disappearance, moving to a small town on Vermont's outskirts. When questioned, his former landlord only recalled Whitmore saying he didn't want to get caught up in Burlington's trouble. That statement now seemed suspicious. However, it was all still speculation. Investigators needed concrete evidence, so they quietly opened a new case file, kept from the press, to monitor Daniel Whitmore. A task force was assigned to observe him, tracking his work schedule, places he frequented, and the old green pickup truck he drove daily. The goal: find an opportunity to collect a current DNA sample to compare with the 2004 evidence. In the community, no one yet knew his name. But inside the investigation room, tension mounted daily. Detectives exchanged grave looks. If this is really the guy we're looking for, Elena Green might have been right next to her killer for months before she vanished. The thought was both chilling and galvanizing. For the Green family, they continued their annual memorials, unaware that the shadow of the first true suspect had been clearly circled. And for Vermont police, the family tree built from a microscopic bloodstain had led them to Daniel Whitmore's doorstep, a man who might hold the key to a secret buried for 14 years. From the moment Daniel Whitmore's name stood out in the genealogical tree, Vermont State Police shifted to full, covert surveillance. A team of detectives was assigned to shadow the 46-year-old's every move. They set up rotating observation shifts, logging his work hours, grocery trips, and regular haunts. Daniel lived simply with few friends, spending most of his time as a freelance plumber, driving his weathered green pickup around Burlington and nearby areas. But his quiet life made him more suspicious, a man who nearly vanished from the community's radar, leaving only faint traces in legal records. Detectives knew that to break the cycle of suspicion, they needed direct DNA evidence. The problem was that Daniel wasn't an arrested criminal. They couldn't force a sample, so they waited for an indirect opportunity, items he discarded. Early attempts failed. Daniel rarely ate out, carried a personal water bottle, and seemed cautious. But one March morning, luck struck. A detective tailed him to a Dunkin' Donuts on Main Street. Daniel ordered a large coffee, drank it in the parking lot, and tossed the paper cup into a trash can out front. As soon as he drove off, a plainclothes officer approached, carefully retrieving the cup and sealing it in an evidence bag. It was a small but pivotal moment, the first time in 19 years police had a direct DNA sample from a suspect. The cup was rushed to Vermont State Lab, where technicians worked in tense silence. They knew a clear result could turn the entire Elena Green case around. Days later, the analysis appeared on the screen. DNA sequences were compared side by side. One from the microscopic blood on the Corolla's floor mat in 2004, the other from saliva on the Dunkin' cup. The technician held their breath, then said slowly, "Perfect match, absolute confirmation." The room erupted. After nearly 2 decades of doubt and dead ends, Vermont police had undeniable evidence. Daniel Whitmore left the blood in Elena's car. When the news reached the main investigation office, detectives sat in stunned silence. A case once deemed cold was now ablaze. In an internal report, the commander wrote, "Elena Green case, primary suspect identified, Daniel Whitmore." Those words sent shivers through veteran officers. Many who searched in 2004, now gray-haired, teared up, reading the update. They knew this was a turning point, the moment the Green family had waited 19 years for. Yet the truth was only partially revealed. The DNA match confirmed Daniel was in Elena's car. But the bigger question lingered: what happened that night, and where was Elena now? Police knew every step forward had to be cautious. They had a suspect, but turning suspicion into a charge required reconstructing the full picture, a daunting but no longer impossible task. Meanwhile, in Burlington, the Green family continued lighting candles each night. They didn't know that, miles away in a lab, DNA sequences had just aligned perfectly, opening a path to bring Elena back to the light of justice after nearly 2 decades. In March 2023, nearly 20 years after Elena Green vanished, the quiet of Barre, Vermont, was shattered by sirens and flashing red and blue lights. At dawn, Vermont State Police's task force stormed a small wooden house on the town's edge, where Daniel Whitmore had lived quietly for years. The wooden door was smashed open, shouts ringing out, "Police! Freeze!" Daniel woke startled, barely reacting before being tackled to the floor, hands cuffed tightly behind him. In a kitchen still smelling of morning coffee, the 51-year-old was led out amid neighbors' stunned gazes, who never imagined the man next door could be tied to a crime haunting the community for nearly 2 decades. A Vermont State Police press release went out that morning. Daniel Whitmore was arrested on charges of kidnapping and first-degree murder in the 2004 disappearance of Elena Green. The news sent shockwaves. Breaking news aired on TV, and papers across the state ran bold headlines. "Arrest after 19 years. Elena Green case has official suspect." What shocked Burlington most was that Daniel had joined the search for Elena in the early days. In 2004, he wore a thick jacket, carried a flashlight, and stood among hundreds of volunteers scouring Lake Champlain. He walked beside the Greens, even comforting the father, "Don't worry, we'll find her." Now, the truth exposed a betrayal that cut to the bone. Media called it betrayal from within, a deception from someone who feigned help. The Green family, upon hearing the news, was nearly speechless. The mother sat stunned, clutching Elena's photo. The father, eyes red, told a local station, "If it's him, for 19 years, we looked into the face of our daughter's killer without knowing." In Barre, Daniel's neighbors spilled onto the street during the arrest. An elderly woman trembled as she told a reporter, "He was kind, fixed pipes for free around here. I can't believe it." Another man shook his head, voice angry. "If it's true, he fooled us all, lived with us, ate with us, then pretended to search for the girl he harmed." On social media, the news spread like wildfire. The Justice for Elena Green Facebook group exploded with thousands of comments in hours. Some wept with joy that justice was near, others remained skeptical, but all agreed the 2-decade wait had arrived. One member wrote, "Elena, "We never forgot you. Today, justice calls your name." At an afternoon press conference, Vermont's police chief spoke to a sea of cameras. DNA evidence from 2004 and Whitmore's recent sample are a perfect match. "This is the first time we have an official suspect in Elena Green's case. We're committed to pursuing justice to the end." His firm words rang like a bell, signaling a new chapter, not just for the case but for Burlington, where the wound never healed. Daniel Whitmore was escorted to Chittenden County Jail, his face grim, refusing reporters' questions. The cell door closed behind him, marking the end of 19 years of freedom while hiding a horrific secret. For the Greens, though pain lingered, they knew justice's wheels were finally turning. Immediately after Daniel's arrest, Vermont police secured a warrant to search his Barra wooden house. On a cold, late March morning, investigators and forensics arrived, setting up white tents and cordoning off the overgrown backyard, filled with weeds and wood scraps. Neighbors gathered behind the fence, silently watching forensic techs in white suits. Initially, they found routine items: rusted tools, old bottles, broken bricks. But when a metal detector scanned the garden's corner, it beeped relentlessly. Digging deeper, the team was horrified to find a concrete slab poured years ago, as if hiding something beneath. Breaking the concrete took hours. Drills roared, white dust clouded the air, and when slabs were lifted, a musty smell of old earth rose. Beneath lay what no one wanted to see: human bone fragments mixed with mud. The scene was immediately sealed off. Forensic experts knelt, carefully collecting each bone and rotted fabric scrap into evidence bags. Silence hung thick, broken only by camera clicks and the team's sharp breaths. All suspicions became reality. The bones were rushed to Vermont State Lab for DNA testing. Meanwhile, the information was kept confidential, shared only with senior investigators. The community held its breath. Elena's father, hearing of the backyard discovery, collapsed into a chair, hands clenched until they bled. The mother, after nearly 2 decades of waiting, repeated, "Please don't let it be her. But if it is, bring her home." 3 days later, DNA results were announced in a closed meeting at Burlington Police Headquarters. Sequences flashed on a large screen, and the forensic expert confirmed in a choked voice, "This is Elena Green, a perfect match with family DNA." The room fell silent. The father bowed his head, shoulders shaking. The mother sobbed aloud. They'd waited 19 years for this day, and now the brutal truth arrived. Elena died that autumn night in 2004, her body buried in the killer's backyard. As the news spread, Vermont reeled. Papers ran stark headlines: "Elena Green returns after 19 years, has bone fragments." Burlington residents lit candles along Church Street, turning it into a sea of light for the young woman who once worked at the small cafe. Old friends embraced, weeping, while the community was speechless at the horrific truth. The man who searched with them, who comforted the Greens, had hidden Elena under cold concrete in his own yard. For the Greens, the pain now had a tangible form. After 19 years, they no longer faced a cycle of hope and despair. Elena had returned, not with the radiant smile of their memories, but as bones in evidence bags. The father spoke through tears. "Our daughter was just miles away all these years. Now, we can finally bring her home." For Vermont, this wasn't just a case's closure, but a bitter reminder that sometimes the darkest evil hides in your own backyard. In September 2023, Chittenden County Courthouse became the nation's focus. Dozens of satellite news vans parked around Burlington Square, reporters crowded the steps, and locals lined up for a seat in the packed courtroom. The Elena Green case, haunting Vermont for 19 years, reached its first trial. Daniel Whitmore, in a wrinkled gray suit, entered with a cold expression, his hands cuffed in front. His eyes scanned the crowd but lingered nowhere, as if denying everything. The Greens sat in the front row, the father gripping his wife's hand, their faces etched with exhaustion from nearly 2 decades of waiting. In the opening, Vermont's prosecutor painted a chilling picture of October 14, 2004. He described how Daniel Whitmore approached Elena as she left the cafe, exploiting the dark Lake Champlain road to lure or overpower her. The prosecution argued Daniel, living 2 blocks away, had grown obsessed with Elena after watching her for days. They laid out the timeline from Elena leaving the cafe, the Corolla driven to the Colchester Marsh, to her body hidden under concrete in Daniel's backyard. This was a premeditated crime, concealed by 19 years of deception, the prosecutor stressed, his voice echoing through the courtroom. The defense countered swiftly. Daniel's lawyer stood, adjusting his tie, and declared, "Your Honor, there's no direct evidence my client committed murder. No witness saw the act, no video footage, only DNA in the car and bones in the yard, but DNA doesn't tell us what happened that night. It doesn't say who caused the death." He argued Elena might have died from another cause, and Daniel, in blind panic, hid her instead of seeking help. The brazen argument chilled some in the courtroom, but planted doubt in the jury. The 12-member jury, carefully selected, was visibly tense from day one. Their eyes shifted from Daniel to the Greens, carrying the weight of responsibility. Instructed to keep open minds until all evidence was presented, they struggled to ignore nearly 2 decades of public belief that Elena was a victim of brutal murder. Some scribbled notes furiously, others pursed their lips, and one shook their head faintly at the defense's claims. The courtroom's atmosphere was thick. Reporters typed frantically. Cameras flashed constantly. Every testimony and detail hit breaking news. Elena Green trial opens. Chilling details revealed. Vermont residents watch TVs, torn between rage and anticipation, as the truth they'd waited 19 years for unfolded publicly. The Greens left the courtroom silently after the first session. The mother leaned into her husband, sobbing, hearing them talk about her like a number, a piece of evidence. "It hurts. But I'll sit there every day until justice is served." Her words aired on that evening's news, reminding all that behind the DNA and crime timelines was a 19-year-old with a bright smile and a family who lost nearly 2 decades waiting for this day. On the 3rd day, the Chittenden County courtroom was so packed that many stood in the hallway. After the prosecutor's crime timeline, they introduced new witnesses, people silent for nearly 2 decades, but now facing the jury. First was Karen Mills, Daniel's former Barry neighbor. In her 60s, frail, she took the stand with trembling hands but a clear voice. She testified that in late October 2004, days after Elena's disappearance flooded the news, she saw Daniel drive a strange silver car into his backyard. "I remember clearly," she said, locking eyes with the jury. "He was covered in mud, and that car wasn't his. I saw him cover it with a tarp, and it was gone by morning." Her words silenced the room. The prosecution showed a photo of Elena's Toyota Corolla, matching Karen's memory. Though 19 years blurred details, the matching color and the car's movement into the yard bolstered suspicion. Daniel had direct contact with Elena's vehicle. Next was Robert Lane, Daniel's former plumbing crew co-worker. He recounted a 2006 drinking night, when Daniel, drunk, hinted about the missing girl the whole town was looking for. Robert, voice shaking, said, "He laughed, saying they'd never find her. I thought it was drunken nonsense, but now, hearing all numb of all, I can't stay silent anymore." The courtroom buzzed, jurors exchanging heavy glances. The prosecution seized the moment, stressing that these testimonies aligned with physical evidence, Daniel's DNA in Elena's car and her body under his yard's concrete. "This is no coincidence," the prosecutor declared. "This is the full picture, where every piece, from bloodstains, witnesses, to odd behavior, points to Daniel Whitmore." The defense pushed back, questioning Karen's memory after nearly 20 years. "Are you sure it wasn't another car, another man?" But her voice was firm. "I lived next to him. I know what Daniel Whitmore looks like, and I know what I saw." When cross-examining Robert, the defense argued barroom talk wasn't evidence, just drunken ramblings. But Robert looked at the jury, saying clearly, "I stayed silent too long. I believe what he said was true." The Greens sat silently, tears falling as neighbors' and co-workers' memories turned into daggers piercing the truth. The father gripped his wife's hand, nodding faintly as the prosecutor concluded. These testimonies, with the DNA evidence, solidify the case. Daniel Whitmore wasn't just coincidentally involved. He had opportunity, motive, and traces. As the session paused, the jury left with heavier expressions. The late testimonies strengthened the prosecution's case. Burlington watched closely. National headlines blaring, neighbors and co-workers break silence. Testimony seals Whitmore's fate. In that high-stakes courtroom, justice for Elena Green was no longer a distant dream, but taking shape. 3 weeks of intense litigation passed like an unrelenting storm in Chittenden County's courtroom. Each day, prosecutors and defense attorneys clashed like blades. One side reconstructing the fateful night of 2004, the other sowing seeds of doubt in the jury. Witness after witness, DNA evidence, images of the salvaged Corolla, testimony about the concrete pit in the yard, all formed an increasingly complete picture. The defense repeated that no one saw the murder, but the weight of each piece weakened their argument with every session. The courtroom's tension was so thick that even reporters' page-turning echoed clearly. On the final day, when the prosecutor concluded with, "Elena Green has waited 19 years for this moment. Please, jury, deliver her justice," the courtroom fell silent. The jury retired to deliberate. The wait felt endless. The Green family clutching each other's hands, eyes fixed on the door. Outside the courthouse, hundreds of Burlington residents and neighbors packed the square, staring at a large screen broadcasting live. Everyone knew, after nearly 2 decades, the decisive moment had arrived. At 9 that evening, the jury returned. The room held its breath as the foreperson stood, voice trembling but firm. "We, the jury, find the defendant Daniel Whitmore guilty of first-degree murder." Murmurs and sobs echoed through the room. Elena's mother collapsed into her husband's shoulder, weeping loudly. The father gripped his wife's hand, tears streaming, but his eyes lit up for the first time in years, the light of truth acknowledged. The judge struck the gavel 3 times, pronouncing, "Daniel Whitmore is sentenced to life imprisonment without parole." The words thundered, ending 19 years of swirling doubt, pain, and darkness. Daniel sat motionless, face blank, eyes on the floor. No words, no tears, as if he chose to bury the rest of his life in silence. The courtroom erupted. Some residents cried, others embraced silently, and some bowed their heads, heavy with sorrow for a community that lived with this wound for nearly 2 decades. Headlines flashed, "Justice for Elena Green. Whitmore sentenced to life without parole." In Burlington Square, where people gathered, cheers mixed with choked sobs. Many lit candles on the spot, turning that autumn night into a blazing sea to welcome long-delayed justice. For the Greens, the verdict couldn't bring Elena back, but it answered the question they'd lived with for 19 years, who took their daughter? The mother stepped out of the courthouse, voice shaking but resolute, telling reporters, "Elena finally has justice. We know she's no longer here, but we can sleep with more peace, knowing her killer will never harm again." The father, face etched with exhaustion, said simply, "We kept our promise to her." The trial ended, but its echoes lingered. In Church Street's cafes, people recalled 2004, remembering the 19-year-old who worked with a warm smile. On the Justice for Elena Green Facebook group, thousands of messages poured in overnight. "Elena, you've finally been heard." Vermont, after nearly 2 decades, could close one of its deepest wounds, though the scar would remain forever. The day after the sentencing, the Green family appeared before the Chittenden County Courthouse for a brief, emotional press conference. Burlington's sky was overcast, gray clouds heavy, cold autumn winds whipping through the square where hundreds of residents and reporters gathered. The father stepped to a wooden podium, voice low and hoarse, eyes still red from a sleepless night. He spoke slowly, each word falling heavily. 20 years of hell have finally ended. We lived in darkness, in unanswered questions, in fear that the truth would stay buried. Yesterday, justice called our daughter's name. Nothing can bring Elena back, but we know her killer will never walk in the light again. Beside them, for the first time in years, Elena's only brother spoke publicly. He clutched his sister's photo, taken at her high school graduation, her face radiant as if yesterday. His voice broke. "Elena taught me to play guitar, always stood up for me when I was little. Today, after nearly 2 decades, I say goodbye. You never left our hearts. Now, you can rest." As he raised the photo, the crowd wept, many touching their chest to share the loss. The mother, frail from years of grief, stepped to the microphone. Wind tousled her hair, but her voice was clear, filled with resolve. Elena deserved a kinder end. She was a good girl, hard-working, full of dreams. That she was buried under cold concrete for nearly 20 years is something no mother can accept. But today, with justice served, I want everyone to remember my daughter, not for her death, but for the life and smile she gave the world. The crowd fell silent, then erupted in prolonged applause. Many Burlington residents who followed the case since 2004 wiped tears, nodding in agreement. Reporters captured every word, but the moment belonged not to the media but to a family finally able to hold their heads high, after 2 decades bowed in sorrow. As they left the podium, the father embraced his wife and son. They walked slowly through the crowd amid whispers. "We're with you." Candles were lit around the square, some singing softly a hymn from Elena's annual memorials. This time, the song wasn't just a plea for hope, but a true farewell. The Greens returned to their small home, where Elena once lived, hanging her photo in the most honored place. They knew life would never be normal, but the darkness had partly lifted. "We kept our promise to her," the father said softly in a final interview. "We didn't give up, and now Elena has been heard." The sentencing closed, but the case's aftershocks echoed across Vermont, especially in Burlington, where the story began and where a community rallied for years to find a missing girl. Residents were stunned to realize Daniel Whitmore, someone they'd met, shared beers with on Church Street, even joined the 2004 Lake Champlain search, was the one who killed Elena and hid her in his backyard. The betrayal spread. Dozens recalled Daniel rowing boats in the search or standing arm in arm listening to the Greens speak. A neighbor told the local paper, "It's unbelievable. We trusted him, invited him to dinner. Knowing he hid that horrific secret for 2 decades chills me." Major regional papers ran editorials. The Burlington Free Press published "The Fragile Trust of Small Communities." It stressed that Vermont prided itself on closeness and safety, making it unthinkable that a killer stood among them. Local radio hosted a roundtable where callers shared Elena memories, mixed with anger that Daniel lived normally while the Greens languished in despair. Many called it not just a murder but a societal wound, shaking the fragile trust of tight-knit communities. In Montpelier, Vermont's legislature swiftly proposed a new bill. Post-sentencing, lawmakers discussed increasing funding for the Vermont State Police's Cold Case Unit. A special fund, the Elena Green Cold Case Fund, was passed to support genealogical DNA in unsolved cases. Legislators emphasized that this case proved modern science's power. A tiny bloodstain from a 2004 car mat traced a killer nearly 2 decades later. The fund committed to training technicians, partnering with labs, and paving the way for other families to find truth. Burlington's community reacted uniquely. A candlelight vigil was held on Church Street, where Elena worked. Hundreds brought flowers and photos, including young students unfamiliar with her, but raised on the missing girl of 2004 story. At the vigil, many shared that the case made them rethink community living. No one could be sure they knew their neighbors. A high school teacher said, "We must balance trust with vigilance. This lesson is costly, but undeniable." Even among law enforcement, the case became a training cornerstone. Young officers studied 2004, 2005, when Elena's file was labeled missing person, suspected homicide, and shelved for years. Veteran investigators admitted the helplessness and tech limits of the time, but warned colleagues that any small detail, a bloodstain, a fleeting statement, could be a future key. On social media, the Justice for Elena Green group continued, shifting to policy advocacy and supporting families of the missing. Membership doubled in weeks post-sentencing, with dozens of daily posts sharing experiences, prayers, or calls to investigate other Vermont and New England cold cases. Beneath it all, pain lingered. Many Burlington residents admitted feeling less safe. A middle-aged woman, who once let her son walk past Elena's cafe to school, cried, "We taught our kids this city was safe, neighbors trustworthy. Now, I'm not sure." But alongside fear was new faith. Justice, though late, could arrive, and Vermont learned a hard lesson to never let cases be forgotten. As 2023 ended, local organizations launched the Remember Elena initiative, educating youth on personal safety, encouraging healthy community vigilance, and honoring unity's strength. Elena Green, the 19-year-old who dreamed of being a nurse, became a statewide symbol of change. For Vermont, the case's aftershocks weren't just sorrow, but a drive to ensure no small community loses vigilance amid seeming peace. From Church Street's candlelight vigil to the courtroom where a life sentence was declared, Elena Green's journey became one Vermont would never forget. It began on a cool October 14, 2004, afternoon, when a 19-year-old finished her cafe shift, called home to say she'd be back, and never crossed her familiar threshold. From that moment, the Greens fell into 2 decades of hell, and Burlington reeled in unanswered fear. Early days saw frantic searches with K9s, helicopters, and hundreds of volunteers. Weeks brought false leads: a different silver Corolla at a gas station, a strange girl in Montpelier. Each hope flared and faded, leaving exhaustion and despair. When police salvaged Elena's Toyota Corolla from the Colchester marsh with a microscopic blood stain but no body, the case turned to foul play. Mark Jensen, her ex-boyfriend, was the first suspect but cleared. The case went cold, filed as missing person, suspected homicide, reporters left, and the family quietly memorialized yearly. 10 years later, they still lit candles, sent letters begging to reopen the case. A Justice for Elena Green Facebook group emerged, keeping her memory alive. Then, in 2018, genealogical DNA arrived in Vermont, shifting the case's fate. From a tiny bloodstain on the Corolla's mat, technicians built a family tree pointing to a Burlington family. Daniel Whitmore, a plumber 2 blocks from Elena's cafe, emerged as central. Police covertly monitored him, collected DNA from a discarded Dunkin' cup, and found a perfect match. After 19 years, a suspect was identified. In March 2023, Daniel was arrested at his Barrie home, shocking the community. Residents reeled, recalling he joined the 2004 search, comforted the Greens, and hid his crime in silence. The betrayal was a lasting wound. A search of Daniel's backyard revealed the brutal truth. Under concrete, police found human bones, Elena Green's. 2 decades of waiting ended in tears as the family learned their daughter returned, but only as fragments. The 3-week trial saw prosecutors build the timeline. Daniel intercepted Elena on her way home, killed her, and hid her body. The defense argued no direct evidence existed, but witnesses emerged. A neighbor saw Daniel drag the Corolla into his yard. A co-worker recalled him hinting at the missing girl in a bar. The jury listened, deliberated, and concluded: first-degree murder. Daniel Whitmore received life without parole. In the courtroom, Elena's parents embraced, her brother raised her photo, and Burlington residents wept silently. Outside, Vermont learned a costly lesson about small communities' fragile trust. Looking back, Elena Green's story isn't just a family's tragedy, but a mirror of time, technology, and community strength. From a calm evening turned nightmare, through hopeless searches, a case cold for nearly 2 decades, to genealogical DNA's breakthrough, justice finally spoke. The message is clear: no case is too old to solve, as long as justice is sought. Sometimes, a tiny DNA sample, a brave witness, or a persistent community can revive truth from darkness. That message isn't just for Vermont, it's for all of us, Readers, listeners, sharers of this story, remember that justice isn't just for police or courts, but for communities. The community kept Elena's memory alive through the Facebook group, memorials, and ceaseless prayers. Without that persistence, without voices saying, "Don't forget Elena Green," her file might have stayed in a cold drawer. So when you see a missing person's face online, hear of an unsolved case, don't look away. A share, a word of care, might be the key. Elena Green never became the nurse she dreamed of, but her story became a symbol etched in the lesson that no matter how long, justice can arrive, and hope must never die. Vermont will forever speak her name, not just to remember, but to remind each other that darkness cannot win if communities keep the flame alive. When justice's light finally shone after 19 years, it lit not just for the Greens, but for all families waiting to name the truth. Elena Green's story isn't just a 2004 Vermont criminal case, but reflects profound lessons for American society today. That a 19-year-old left her cafe shift and vanished in Burlington, a small, supposedly safe community, reminds us no place is fully immune to danger. The police's initial runaway case label shows authorities can misjudge, so communities, families, and technology must together drive justice. For 19 years, the Greens held memorials, created the Justice for Elena Green Facebook group to keep their daughter's memory alive. That persistence, with genealogical DNA's rise, paved the way for the breakthrough. A tiny bloodstain in the 2004 Corolla became the key to exposing Daniel Whitmore. The lesson: no matter how cold a case, if communities keep remembering and technology is used right, justice can arrive. In today's America, with missing persons reported daily, remember that a social media share, a community mention, or support for policies like Vermont's new Cold Case Fund can make a difference. Elena never became the nurse she dreamed of, but her story teaches that justice dies only when communities stop seeking. Each of us has a duty to ensure no one is forgotten in the dark. If you believe no case is too old for truth, subscribe to follow more cold case stories. Thank you for joining the journey to find justice for Elena Green. See you in the next video.